In the year when the Nile rose gently and the gods seemed watchful, Egypt prepared for war. At the heart of this moment stood Thutmose III, young in years but hardened by patience. For more than 2 decades he had ruled in name while others held true power. Now, the crown was finally his alone, and the world beyond Egypt had begun to test him. To the northeast lay Canaan, a land of hills, fortified cities, and ambitious kings. These rulers had once bowed to Egypt, sending tribute and sons as hostages. But time had weakened loyalty. At the center of the rebellion stood Megiddo, a city guarding the vital trade routes between Egypt and Mesopotamia. Whoever controlled Megiddo controlled the arteries of power. The princes of Canaan gathered there. They believed Egypt was distracted, they believed the young pharaoh was weak, they believed rebellion would succeed. They were wrong. The call to arms in Thebes, beneath towering columns carved with victories of forgotten kings, messengers arrived breathless. Their dust-covered faces told the story before their lips did. Megiddo has risen, they said. The princes have united. They deny your rule. The court grew silent. Thutmose III did not shout. He did not rage. He smiled. This, he said calmly, is what I have waited for. Orders echoed across Egypt. Granaries opened. Armorers worked day and night. Chariots, light, deadly, and fast, were prepared in numbers never seen before. The army that gathered was not a rabble. It was a machine, veteran infantry with bronze spears, archers trained to fire in deadly volleys, charioteers who could strike and vanish like the wind, priests blessed banners. Scribes recorded names. Mothers wept in silence. The gods, it was said, favored bold kings. March into Asia. The army crossed the Sinai in disciplined columns, moving like a living river of bronze and linen. Supplies followed precisely calculated routes. Wells were secured. Fortresses reopened. Thutmose III led from the front, not as a reckless youth, but as a strategist. As the army neared Canaan, scouts brought urgent reports. The Canaanite coalition awaited him near Megiddo, blocking the most obvious routes. 3 paths lay ahead: a northern route, wide, safe; slow; a southern route, predictable, heavily guarded; a narrow mountain pass at Aruna, dangerous, cramped, and unseen. His generals argued fiercely. The Aruna Pass is madness, they warned. One ambush could destroy us. Thutmose listened, then he spoke words that would echo through history. I swear, he said, that I will go by the Aruna road. Let whoever wishes turn back. I will not be accused of cowardice. No one turned back. The gamble. The Aruna Pass was a knife wound in the earth, steep cliffs, twisting paths. A place where one broken chariot could halt an army. For days, the Egyptians advanced single file, vulnerable to annihilation, yet the ambush never came. The Canaanite princes had assumed, like all cautious men, that Egypt would choose safety. They guarded the wide roads and left the pass unprotected. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. The Egyptian army emerged onto the plain of Megiddo, organized, intact, and directly behind enemy lines. Panic spread through the coalition, trumpets blared. Chariots scrambled. Commands contradicted one another. Thutmose III raised his bow. The gods have delivered them, he said. The battle begins. The sun climbed as dust rose from thousands of feet. Egyptian archers advanced first, darkening the sky with arrows. Bronze tips pierced shields, flesh, and confidence. Chariots followed, wheels screaming, horses foaming, death moving faster than fear. The Canaanite forces fought bravely, but disorganized, their unity shattered under pressure. Some fled toward Megiddo's gates. Others stood and died. Princes who had boasted of victory now begged their gods for mercy. The field became chaos, and then, disaster. The fatal pause. Victory was within Egypt's grasp, but soldiers stopped. They looted golden chariots, fine armor, rich garments of fallen princes. The discipline that had won the battle dissolved into greed. The enemy escaped into Megiddo. The city gates slammed shut. Thutmose III was furious, but controlled. They have trapped themselves, he said. Now we wait. The siege of Megiddo. Megiddo was strong, its walls rose high. Its granaries were full. Its people desperate but determined. The Egyptians built a massive encirclement, ditches, walls, watchtowers. No one entered. No one left. Months passed, hunger became the enemy within. Finally, the gates opened, the princes of Canaan emerged barefoot, heads bowed, children clinging to them. They surrendered everything, lands, wealth, sons, Thutmose III accepted, not with mercy, but with calculation. Aftermath. Megiddo fell, Canaan was broken, Egypt became the undisputed power of the Near East, scribes carved the victory into temple walls, the first recorded battle in detailed history. Thutmose III would later be called the Napoleon of ancient Egypt. But on that day, he was simply a king who understood one truth: fortune favors those who dare where others fear. When the gates of Megiddo slammed shut, the sound echoed across the plain like a verdict from the gods. Dust still hung in the air from the shattered battle lines. Egyptian chariots stood idle, their wheels streaked with blood and soil. The battlefield had already begun to cool, but inside the city, panic burned hotter than fire. The princes of Canaan, those who had sworn to resist Egypt, now ran through the streets of Megiddo like hunted men. Armor was discarded. Banners were torn down. Messengers shouted conflicting orders, each one more desperate than the last. They had escaped annihilation by chance and greed, they knew it. Inside the walls Megiddo had always been a city of confidence. Its walls were thick, its towers high, its position legendary. Merchants once boasted that no army could starve it into submission. Now, those same merchants hoarded grain, granaries were sealed. Wells were guarded. Every loaf of bread became a weapon, families crowded into temples, begging gods who had already chosen their side. Children cried for fathers who would never return. Women whispered rumors, some said Egypt would slaughter them all, others that surrender would bring chains and exile. At the heart of the city, the council of princes gathered. Their leader, the prince of Kadesh, spoke last. His armor was scratched, his voice raw. We underestimated him, he said. Thutmose III is not a child king. Silence followed. No one dared suggest opening the gates. The pharaohs calm outside the walls. Thutmose III surveyed the city from his chariot. His generals waited for fury. It did not come. They have done our work for us, he said quietly. Now we surround them. The order was precise and ruthless. Egyptian soldiers dug trenches. Wooden palisades rose. Watchtowers were placed at intervals measured by scribes. No farmer could slip through. No messenger could escape. Megiddo was not attacked. It was isolated. The pharaoh ordered scribes to record every step. This victory would not be forgotten, not by Egypt, and not by history. Weeks of waiting time became the sharpest weapon. Days passed, then weeks. The Egyptian camp settled into routine. Supplies flowed in from loyal cities. Soldiers trained, prayed, and sharpened blades they did not yet need. Inside Megiddo, fear fermented, rations were cut. Arguments turned violent. The princes blamed one another in hushed corners. Loyalty, once the foundation of their alliance, crumbled under hunger. A baker was beaten for hiding flour. A priest was executed for stealing grain meant for the gods. The city devoured itself. At night, Egyptian fires burned in a perfect ring around Megiddo. The glow reminded the trapped citizens that the world still existed, just beyond reach. A failed escape. One moonless night, a group of nobles attempted escape. They lowered themselves from the walls with ropes woven from bedding and cloth. For a moment, hope breathed again, then Egyptian horns sounded, arrows cut the darkness. Bodies fell soundlessly into the ditch below the wall. The survivors were dragged before Thutmose III at dawn. The pharaoh did not execute them. He sent them back, alive, with a message: there is no road except through me. The breaking point. By the third month, hunger ruled Megiddo. Horses were slaughtered. Dogs disappeared. Leather armor was boiled and eaten. Children stopped crying, not because they were comforted, but because they were too weak. The princes met again. This time, there was no argument. They wrapped their fine garments around their heads, removed their sandals, and prepared their sons, their heirs, as offerings of submission. At sunrise, the gates opened. Slowly, the Egyptian army stood in perfect silence. The princes emerged barefoot, heads bowed, children trembling beside them. They knelt in the dust where their armies had once stood proud. Judgment. Thutmose III descended from his chariot. He did not shout. He did not smile. He looked at them as one looks at a problem already solved. You rebelled, he said. You gambled your people's lives. No one spoke. You lost. The princes placed their foreheads in the dirt, Thutmose III spared the cities, but not their independence. Lands were confiscated. Tribute was doubled. Sons were taken to Egypt, not as slaves, but as hostages raised in loyalty to the pharaoh. Megiddo lived, but it would never lead again. The record of victory back in Egypt, artisans carved the story into stone on the walls of Karnak. Every march. Every decision. Every mistake. The Battle of Megiddo became the first battle in history recorded in tactical detail, not as myth.as instruction, and across the Near East, kings learned a lesson written not in ink, but in fear. Egypt did not forget rebellion, and its pharaoh did not gamble twice. Long before the gates of Megiddo opened in surrender, the rebellion had already died. It died not on the battlefield, but in whispers. Before the storm. In the months before Egypt marched, the princes of Canaan met in confidence and arrogance. They gathered in Megiddo's high halls, drinking wine imported from the coast, boasting beneath painted ceilings that showed old victories won against weaker foes. The prince of Kadesh spoke most loudly. Egypt is ruled by a boy, he said. His armies are stretched thin. The time is now. Others nodded, not because they fully believed him, but because defiance had become contagious. Tribute was heavy. Egyptian overseers were insulting. Sons were taken as hostages. Resentment grew faster than reason. Only one prince warned them. Egypt does not forget, he said. And Thutmose III is not weak. He has waited. They laughed at him. By dawn, the decision was made. They would stand together, or fall together. Unity built on fear. The coalition was never strong. Each prince brought soldiers, but guarded his own interests. They camped near Megiddo, but watched one another as carefully as they watched Egypt. When reports arrived that the Egyptian army had reached Canaan, confidence wavered. They will take the northern road, one prince said. They must, another replied. The pass is suicide. So they fortified the wide roads. They placed chariots where the land favored them. They waited, and waited, then the scouts came running. They are behind us. Panic spread like fire in dry grass. The collapse on the battlefield. Courage existed, but command did not. When Egyptian chariots burst onto the plain, the coalition reacted as individuals, not an army. Some charged. Some retreated. Some froze. Orders contradicted each other. A prince saw his rival flee and followed, not out of fear, but calculation. Another stood too long and died because no one supported him. The unity that had justified rebellion dissolved in minutes. By midday, Megiddo's gates were their only hope. Behind closed walls inside the city, the princes faced one another without armor or excuses. This is your fault, one shouted. You promised. Egypt was slow. Another snarled. The prince of Kadesh said nothing. He stared at the floor, already understanding the end.as. The siege tightened, old alliances rotted, guards were bribed. Grain was stolen. Blame became currency. The people watched their rulers argue while children starved. That was when loyalty truly ended. The gods are silent temples filled with prayers. Priests burned incense until their eyes watered. They sacrificed animals, then treasures, then heirlooms. No answer came. Some whispered that Egypt's gods were stronger. Others claimed their own gods had abandoned them for arrogance. Faith cracked. At night, the princes dreamed of open fields and escape. By morning, they woke to the same walls and the same hunger. Betrayal. A deal was proposed in secret. One prince would open a postern gate and let Egyptians in, hoping to save his family. Another learned of it and threatened exposure. The deal collapsed into violence. By the time order was restored, 2 princes were dead, not by Egyptian hands, but by their own. The city bled from within. Surrender without dignity. When the gates finally opened, the princes felt relief mixed with humiliation. They had once imagined standing as equals before Egypt. Now they crawled. Their sons, heirs who had been taught to rule, clung to them in terror. These boys would be taken east, raised in Egypt, taught loyalty to a foreign crown. Canaan would remember this generation as failures. After the fall, Egypt did not destroy the cities. That mercy was worse. Life resumed under watchful eyes. Tribute caravans grew heavier. Egyptian officials replaced local authority. Hostages ensured obedience. The people survived, the princes did not. They returned to their cities stripped of power, mocked in silence, obeyed out of fear rather than respect. Some drank themselves into oblivion, others prayed for death. A few tried to rebel again, and vanished. memory as punishment. Years later, children would ask why their fathers bowed when Egyptian banners passed. The answer was always the same: because once, we thought ourselves strong. The name Megiddo became a warning rather than a boast, and in distant courts across the Near East, kings studying rebellion learned something new, not from Egyptian triumph, but from Canaanite failure. Unity without discipline is illusion, courage without strategy is suicide, and pride invites historians. War had always existed, but at Megiddo, war changed. On the wide plain below Megiddo, the armies of Egypt did not fight like raiders or levies. They moved as parts of a single mind, trained, supplied, and commanded with precision unseen before. That At the center of this transformation stood Thutmose III, the Egyptian war machine. Egypt's army was not the largest in the world, but it was the most disciplined. Its strength lay in structure. Infantry formed the backbone, spearmen with large shields, arranged in tight ranks to hold ground and protect archers. These men did not chase glory. They held lines. Behind them came archers, trained from youth to fire rapidly and accurately. Their bows, composite and deadly, could pierce leather armor and shatter morale before swords ever met. But the true revolution came on wheels, the chariot as a weapon. Egyptian chariots were light, fast, and terrifying. Unlike heavier Canaanite designs, Egypt's chariots were built for speed and maneuverability. 2 men rode each, a driver and a warrior. The driver focused only on movement, the warrior focused only on death. These chariots did not crash blindly into enemy ranks, they flowed, they swept across the battlefield, firing arrows, cutting down isolated soldiers, then vanishing before retaliation could come. They struck morale as much as flesh. To soldiers on foot, they seemed unstoppable, metal, horses, and gods moving as one. Command and control. What separated Megiddo from earlier battles was not bravery, but coordination. Thutmose III positioned himself where he could see everything. Signals, horns, banners, messengers, carried his will across the field. Units advanced, withdrew, and regrouped on command. When archers advanced, infantry protected them. When chariots struck, infantry exploited the gaps. When resistance stiffened, pressure shifted elsewhere. The Canaanite coalition had courage, but no unity of command. They fought as princes. Egypt fought as an army. The Aruna Pass. Strategy over strength. The greatest tactical victory came before battle was joined up. By choosing the narrow Aruna Pass, Thutmose III demonstrated a principle that would shape warfare for millennia. Surprise outweighs numbers. The pass forced the Egyptian army into a dangerous formation, but it also allowed them to appear where the enemy least expected. When they emerged onto the plain intact, the psychological blow was devastating. The Canaanite leaders realized too late that their assumptions had betrayed them. Strategy had already won half the battle. Psychology of fear. Egyptian warfare was as much mental as physical. The banners, the rhythm of drums, the precision of movement, all conveyed inevitability. Soldiers who believe defeat is unavoidable often make it so. At Megiddo, panic spread faster than arrows. Units withdrew without orders. Chariots collided. Princes abandoned positions to save themselves. Fear became Egypt's silent ally, the cost of indiscipline. Yet even the greatest army is vulnerable to human weakness. When the Canaanite lines collapsed, Egyptian soldiers broke formation to loot. They seized chariots, armor, and gold. Discipline cracked. This single failure allowed the enemy to escape into Megiddo. It was a costly lesson. Victory delayed becomes resistance prolonged. Thutmose III would never forget it. Learning from error. Unlike many kings, Thutmose did not hide mistakes, that he recorded them. The battle inscriptions at Karnak describe not only success, but failure. Future commanders were meant to learn. After Megiddo, Egyptian discipline tightened. Looting was delayed. Siege protocols were refined. Commanders were held accountable. Megiddo became a military classroom carved in stone. A new way of war. The legacy of Megiddo was not just Egyptian dominance, it was transformation. Other powers studied Egypt's methods. Chariots spread across the Near East. Armies reorganized. Kings realized that warfare required planning, logistics, and intelligence, not just courage. War became professional, calculated, recorded, and history itself changed, because Megiddo was remembered not through legend, but documentation. The soldiers' view. For the men who fought there, theory meant little. They remembered dust in their mouths, the scream of horses, the sound of arrows striking shields. The moment when the enemy broke and the world tilted toward victory, many returned home with scars and silence, but they had participated in something new, they had fought the future. The battlefield fell silent, but the war was not yet finished. Beyond the broken chariots and scattered weapons, the city of Megiddo still stood, its gates shut, its walls crowded with refugees, princes, and defeated soldiers who had fled in panic. Victory had opened the plain, but conquest required patience. The siege begins. Thutmose III did not rush the walls, instead, he ordered a ring of control to be built around the city, wooden palisades, watchtowers, and supply points. Nothing entered Megiddo. Nothing left. The Egyptian army settled into a disciplined encirclement, turning speed into endurance. This was not rage, this was method. The siege would last months, but time favored Egypt. Inside the city, food dwindled. Horses weakened. Hope thinned. Outside, Egyptian supply lines flowed steadily from the Nile Valley, a testament to logistics as a weapon. War had become systemic. The surrender of kings eventually, the gates opened, not in defiance, but in submission. The rulers of Canaan emerged one by one, laying down weapons, offering tribute, and bowing before Thutmose III. They brought gifts, gold, silver, chariots, weapons, and hostages, sons of kings, sent to Egypt to be raised as loyal servants of the empire. This was not annihilation, that it was absorption. The Near East did not fall into chaos, it was reorganized under Egyptian authority. From victory to empire. Megiddo marked the moment Egypt ceased to be merely a great kingdom and became an empire. Before this campaign, Egypt defended its borders. After Megiddo, Egypt projected power far beyond them. Tribute flowed south. Roads were secured. Garrisons were established. Diplomacy followed the sword. Cities that resisted were isolated. Cities that complied prospered. Thutmose III ruled not just with fear, but with structure. The warrior king transformed. The young pharaoh who had marched through the Aruna Pass returned transformed. Megiddo made Thutmose III more than a conqueror, it made him a strategist, administrator, and imperial architect. Campaign after campaign followed, each built upon lessons learned in that first great battle. He would lead over a dozen successful military expeditions, extending Egyptian influence deep into Syria and beyond. But Megiddo was always first, the blueprint, history written in stone. Upon his return to Egypt, Thutmose ordered the story of Megiddo carved into the walls of Karnak temple. This was unprecedented. Kings had celebrated victories before, but never with such detail. Routes, formations, mistakes, and triumphs were recorded. War was no longer just sung by poets, it was analyzed by commanders. Megiddo became the first fully documented battle in recorded history. Memory itself was weaponized. The soldiers' reward. The men who fought at Megiddo were not forgotten, they received land, gold, and honors. Veterans returned home not as nameless survivors, but as pillars of the state. The army became a respected profession, drawing talent and loyalty from across Egypt. Service to the crown became a path to legacy. Echoes across centuries. Megiddo's shadow stretched far beyond its own age. Later empires would follow Egypt's model: professional armies, centralized command, strategic logistics, psychological warfare. From Assyria to Rome, the principles born at Megiddo resurfaced again and again. Even its name endured. Centuries later, Megiddo would be remembered as a place of ultimate conflict, a symbol of decisive war, fate, and turning points. The battlefield became myth, prophecy, and warning, that a reminder that some places shape history forever. The meaning of Megiddo. Megiddo was not the bloodiest battle. It was not the largest, but it was the most important. It proved that planning could defeat numbers, that discipline could overcome chaos, and that war, when recorded and learned from, could evolve. Megiddo, humanity crossed a line. From heroic combat, to organized warfare, to empire, and at the center of it all stood a king who understood. That victory was not the end, but the beginning. The victory at Megiddo did not bring peace. It brought responsibility. Empire, once born, demands constant attention. Borders must be watched. Vassals must be reminded. Roads must be guarded. Armies must move even when swords are not drawn. For Thutmose III, conquest had opened a door he could never close. Campaigns without end. In the years following Megiddo, rebellion flickered like sparks across the Levant. Cities that had bowed now tested Egypt's resolve. New rulers rose who had not witnessed the battle and underestimated the pharaoh's reach. Each challenge was met with swift response. Year after year, Thutmose III marched north, not with reckless fury, but with calculated force. Some campaigns ended without battle. The mere arrival of the Egyptian army was enough. Others ended in sieges, skirmishes, and decisive strikes. Each expedition reinforced the lesson first taught at Megiddo: resistance was costly, loyalty was profitable. By the midpoint of his reign, Egyptian banners flew farther than ever before, from the coast of the Mediterranean to the fringes of the Euphrates. War becomes routine. What once was extraordinary became systematic. Supply depots were established along permanent routes. Intelligence networks gathered information before armies moved. Local rulers were required to send annual tribute and hostages, not as punishment, but as insurance. Children of defeated kings grew up in Egypt, educated in its language, its customs, its loyalty. When they returned home to rule, they ruled as Egyptians in all but blood. This was empire without extermination. A quiet domination. The pharaoh as administrator. Thutmose III is often remembered as a warrior, but it was governance that preserved his victories. Taxes were standardized. Trade routes were protected. Artisans, merchants, and priests followed the army, turning conquered land into functioning provinces. Temples rose beside forts, binding religion to authority. The gods of Egypt traveled with the empire. Ammonius' name was spoken in foreign cities. Egyptian rituals blended with local traditions, creating a shared imperial culture. Power was reinforced not only by soldiers, but by belief. The cost beneath the glory, yet beneath the triumph lay exhaustion. Soldiers aged. Campaigns stole fathers from sons. Fields went untended when men marched north. Not every expedition returned rich, not every veteran returned alive. Thutmose III himself bore the burden. He ruled longer than most kings, but with each year the weight of command grew heavier. Victory demanded vigilance. One moment of weakness could unravel decades of conquest. An empire, once expanded, could never rest. A kingdom secured in his later years, rebellion slowed, not because enemies vanished, but because Egypt's power had become unquestioned. The map itself had changed. Trade flowed through Egyptian-controlled corridors. Diplomacy replaced warfare in many regions. Foreign kings sent gifts not in fear, but in recognition. Egypt had become the center of the known world's balance of power, and Megiddo remained the cornerstone of that reality. The final years when Thutmose III finally withdrew from constant campaigning, he left behind an empire stable enough to endure without him. Monuments rose in his honor. His victories were recited in temples. His strategies were studied by commanders who would never see battle, yet he did not declare himself divine. He presented himself as servant of the gods, guardian of order, keeper of Mot, the balance between chaos and harmony. Perhaps Megiddo had taught him that even kings stand on fragile ground. Death of a conqueror. When Thutmose III died, there was no collapse. That alone was his greatest achievement. Power passed smoothly. Borders held. Tribute continued. The empire endured not because of fear, but because it worked. Few conquerors in history achieved that. Megiddo remembered centuries past. Empires rose and fell. New gods were named. New languages replaced old ones. But Megiddo was never forgotten. It remained a symbol, a place where the future pivoted. Where strategy defeated chance. Where history first paused to record war not as legend, but as lesson. The stones of Megiddo had seen chariots clash, kings kneel, and an empire awaken, and though the warriors were gone, their choices still echoed, because some battles do not end when the fighting stops, they end when the world they created finally disappears.